This episode is sponsored by Be Water Smart, bewatersmart.info. Drought and water conservation is a way of life in the West, but saving water should always be a good garden practice wherever you live. Be Water Smart is making it their goal to help gardeners, homeowners, and residents do their part with helpful tips, videos, and links. You will find tips on irrigation, such as when you should water, which type of drip or sprinklers are best, and even a very helpful video on how to convert standard sprinklers to drip. Plus, what I always preach about, mulching. Remember, no pixie dust. And you'll even find a video of me talking about it. And of course, you've heard me say over and over again, check your soil moisture before you water. Why waste water when not necessary? Be Water Smart has helpful tips so you know you are watering efficiently and correctly. This includes how to water trees and even save 30% more on lawn irrigation. Plus, they have a database of 1,800 low water use plants. Yes, 1,800 plants. Plus, garden tours and pictures to help you design and plant your water-wise landscaping. And since watering smart saves not only our precious resource, but helps you save money, they have links for rebates and services. So stay current on Be Water Smart news by signing up so you don't miss important info. That's bewatersmart.info.
Look at that plant. I want you to know that everything was grown in my garden. Don't touch that plant!
Is it poisonous?
She'll become part of the plant.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Flower Power Garden Hour. I'm your host, Marlene, and this is your November to-do list. So remember, everyone, I'm coming at this from Zone 9. If you are in a different zone, make sure you double check. And of course, there's going to be caveats to it depending on your zone. So I'm just going to get started. As most of you are probably experiencing, temperatures are dropping and it has been raining here, thank goodness. And days are shortening too. So one thing I've noticed with the shortening days and the rain is winter weeds are coming up. We're lucky in Zone 9 that we get 2 seasons of weeds. We get summer weeds and we get winter weeds. And the winter weeds are actually harder to control because they come up wherever the rain is at versus summer weeds, where if you don't irrigate, you won't really have too many, I shouldn't say, but some thrive on really low water, so you'll have them. The winter weed that I've usually fight the most with, and I've sort of given up fighting it, though, is Oxalis prescape. It looks like, 4-leaf clover, has the yellow flowers, goes by sour grass. It gets its name. It's not a grass at all. If you've ever chewed on the stems of the flowers growing up, it has that oxalic acid. So it's got that real sour bite to it, but it spreads by underground tubers and it could spread and spreads by seeds as well. And you actually has so much oxalic acid that if you are weed whacking, you could actually breathe it in and you can almost feel it. So when I'm weed eating it, I'm like, oh man, I actually like breathing that in. But to get rid of it, you could just knock it down to prevent it going to seed. But to really get rid of it, you have to dig up the tubers because those are going to go dormant. That's why it comes back so quickly in the winter, is because those tubers are just there waiting for it. I have so much of it that I tend to just let it go. I actually use it as a buffer in some of my frost-sensitive plants because it acts as a blanket around. And then it dies down in spring. So you could either fight it. If you have a lot of winter plants, you definitely don't want it around because, of course, weeds will outcompete. But if you have an area where you really don't have a lot of plants, you can let it go. I mean, I recommend if you don't have a lot of it, you have some of it, definitely dig it out. You don't want it established. So that's just one weed. There's a lot of annual grasses as well. I even have mallow, which is happier with this rain right now. So winter weeds, dig them up. Of course, mulch, cardboard around works great. So weed control, if you're in an area, quote, lucky enough to have winter weeds. Obviously, turn off irrigation. That's a lot of people forget and leave their irrigation on. As soon as we start getting cooler temperatures and some rain, make sure you could turn your irrigation off. Of course, you don't want to just turn it off and forget about it. If we go through a really heavy dry last year, we actually had to turn our irrigation on if you had a vegetable garden. But I've been planting and digging in the soil, and the soil from the one day we got 6.5 inches of rain really did a good job of moistening our soil. And of course, with overcast days and shorter days, that moisture is staying in there. So I've turned irrigation off. Plant California native seeds. If you want to grow poppies, phacelia, um, any of the California natives, lupins, now is a good time to sow the seeds in the ground. Remember, they do best when the area is clear. So if you have a lot of debris, inches of debris, you don't want to just throw the seed on there. Make sure you have a nice smooth soil area and sort of just rake it in. A lot of these seeds don't need to be dug in. They could be sort of broadcast sprayed, but I like to sort of rake them over, some soil over them as well. You could plant sweet pea seeds right now or plants. Some nurseries actually have the plants already. You could buy the seeds and plant. I have sweet peas already popping up. They're really good at self-sowing. If you have so many, they could become a little weedy and you just pull them out of areas you don't like, but they're already popping up. They won't bloom until next February or March, but they like the cool season. So you want to plant them now to get them going and established so you have them blooming, because as soon as our heat comes, that's it. And if we get early heat, this is a very short bloom period. I don't even bother soaking the seeds, but a lot of times when you soak pea seeds, any type of pea seeds, just soak them in, lukewarm water overnight, or you could soak them in a wet paper towel and then plant them. It just helps to sort of break that seed coat. Don't plant them with your well, you can plant them with your vegetables. I'm not going to tell you not to, but those pods are actually poisonous, so you don't want to ever get your peas mixed up. But I love sweet peas. Like I said, once you have them, they tend to go to seed and you almost never have to replant them unless you want different varieties. Then buy some seeds. Plant perennials. That means plants that grow more than 1 year. Now is a great time. Temperatures are still warm enough so they'll get established. And with this rain, of course, you won't have to water them in. They'll get established and next spring they'll just take off like crazy. Avoid any frost-sensitive plants. I wouldn't plant avocados or citrus or some salvias even that are frost-sensitive. Wait until spring for those. But also remember, don't work your wet soils. If soil is really, really wet, soggy, you don't want to dig into it. So if you have heavy rains, wait a few days, dig in. If you're walking on the soil a lot that's wet, lay some planks of wood and walk on that instead of the soil. You don't want to compact your soil and get rid of all those air spaces, especially with clay soils. It forms bricks and it just sort of degrades your actual soil structure. You don't want to get rid of all those airspace because roots need airspace. Bring plumerias in. Plumerias are sensitive to the cold. You could bring them in. A lot of people bring them into their garage, which isn't necessarily the best because you still want them to have a little bit of light. When you bring them in, don't be surprised if they automatically drop their leaves. That's fine. They're going to go dormant. They're going to photosynthesize a tiny bit because their stems are green, so give them some light. Once their leaves drop, they don't need much water at all. They're pretty darn succulent, so ease off the watering a lot. Only water when the soil's really dry. And keep them by bright light, and then in spring, move them out again. If it's too big to bring inside, move them up to your house. Wrap the holiday lights like the C9, but not the LED ones, the original ones. LED doesn't put off enough heat. And then when we get a really cold temperature, put a blanket over or a sheet, but up against the house will help somewhat. We have them growing outside at the conservatory between 2 greenhouses mixed amongst plants. And we don't cover them and they do okay. But remember, those greenhouses are radiating heat. So you want that radiated heat from a building and protection all around it. And remember, when you're covering pots with a blanket for frost, put it under the pot. Don't just stop at the bottom of the plant. Put it under the pot because you want to make sure that the roots are staying warm. And also the heat from that soil is going to radiate up and keep your plant warm. But we're not getting to frost yet. But I would just start thinking about bringing your plumerias in. Move your succulents out of the rain if they're in pots, if that's possible. If they're in the soil, hopefully it's really fast draining soil. If they're in pots and you can move them, get them out of the rain because it's the wet conditions that cause succulents to rot faster than anything. And if you can't, at least go and check to make sure there's not standing water. When the soil gets so inundated, it may not even drain and you may have standing water in your pots or the saucers. Get that water out of there. But if you can, bring the succulents up close to your house. They won't need any winter irrigation pretty much at all. You could give them a little bit of water when they're really dry, but they're pretty much stopped growing and you don't want to water them anyways. So you don't want those pots to get soggy wet because that leads to rot. Plant cover crops, fava beans, red clover, legumes. Remember, those are you could do basically anything that you're going to grow for green material and cut down before it fruits or it's in bloom. Then you cut it down, and that's going to give your plant your soil some nitrogen. Your nitrogen fixing plants, you're going to definitely want to cut when they're in bloom. And those are going to be your legumes. And that's just a good way of getting extra nitrogen into your soil. Also, planting veggies. Okay, so you could still plant vegetables. Just going to go through a list here. Fava beans, bok choy, broccoli, rabe, celery, Swiss chard, garlic, kale, kohlrabi, loose leaf lettuce, mustard, onions, radish, shallots, and spinach. You could all plant now in November. With your vegetables, make sure that you have a BT, Bacillus, on hand, because the cabbage loopers are still a lot of pests are gone once it's cold. You shouldn't have aphids right now. I know thrips are gone. Whiteflies are probably gone, but the cabbage looper butterfly is still laying its eggs, and it's the larvae that eats your winter vegetables. So you'll sometimes notice their poo, but you'll definitely notice a lot of holes chewed out of it. Of course, snails and slugs could still be doing their job, so add Sluggo, which is iron phosphate. And if you do Sluggo Plus, it has the spinosad that controls a lot of the earwigs and other things that we'll eat. You could add beneficial nematodes this time of year. You could buy it at Arbico Organics and mix it with water and sprinkle it in your soil. There's different good nematodes for different things. I think they sell a mix of them. But if you've had problems with, I know for me, it was cucumber beetles that I'm doing the nematodes for and hoping it cuts down the larvae in the soil. And then I won't have as many cucumber beetles as next year. Dividing plants. So if you have grasses, agapanthus, irises, things that are bunching out, when they go dormant and it's cooler, it's a good idea, if they're too big, is to dig them up. You could divide them. Now with irises, it's easy. You just pull the rhizomes apart, separate them. For grasses, you want a serrated knife and cut into the root ball, and you can just cut it and score it and make as many pieces as you want. Agapanthus, you're just sort of dividing up the tubers. And that way, if you could just either keep your plant small, give parts away. A lot of times what happens when you have irises is they're really crowded. The flowers get smaller and smaller and smaller, and you want these really big flowers. So when you give them more space for the rhizomes to grow, they'll bloom bigger. Bulbs. Speaking of bulbs, we consider rhizomes under the category of bulbs, even though a rhizome is a modified stem. Your bulbs, you could buy them. Of course, you could buy irises, daffodils, tulips, ranunculus, amaryllis, pretty much all your spring blooming bulbs. Amaryllis are late summer, but they do sell them, so you could force them to bloom around Christmas and holidays. The ones you do have to be worried about are tulips. They do need a chill 8 to 12 weeks in your fridge, not freezer, to get the chill that they haven't had and they won't have in our winter. I noticed some nurseries are getting a little bit more on the bandwagon, and they were having the Darwin varieties, which do much better without chill. Of course, they don't quite look like the standard tulip that we're used to seeing. But unfortunately, the tulips that are like the parrot tulips and such, those have to be dug up after they're done blooming and the foliage dies down, and then put in storage and then chilled before you plant again, because we just don't get the cold. But if you're buying them, chill them and then plant them. Same with hyacinths, but I've had way better luck with hyacinths coming back each year without digging them up and chilling them. But if you get them, you might as well chill them as well for put them in the fridge. Of course, cleanup. Cleanup's big thing. Ripping things out of vegetable gardens, putting things in the compost bin. Remember, like Bermuda grass and any grasses that are weeds that you pull that have seed pods on them. You really don't want to put them in your compost bin if they're very, problematic weeds. Put them in your garbage. And, leaves, you could leave a good amount of leaves. That's great as mulch, great as compost, great as homes for overwintering good bugs and mammals and things like that. But it's a balance. You always want to pick up old fruit because that harbors a lot of bad pests. If you've had viruses or certain diseases, you do want to clean all that up around. But if you just have, plants with leaves falling down, it's okay. You don't have to rake everything up and keep everything pristine. It's a balance. It's knowing what is problematic and what isn't. And and also what do you cut back? Now, some plants are actually, I'm going to use Salvia Leucantha as one. It's the Mexican bush sage. It's probably very leggy at this point, still may be blooming, but you also may see new growth at the base. And you really sort of you're like, oh, I want to prune that old foliage off because look at all that new foliage. That one could be slightly frost sensitive. So if you have when in doubt, leave the old foliage because it acts as a blanket. If you definitely know something's frost sensitive, don't cut it back now. Wait until spring. But things that you could cut back, like some ornamental oreganos, culinary oreganos, when the flowers are spent, the foliage is, old, but I see this new mat of new growth. I cut the old off. I have that nice new mat of growth at the base. So really just hopefully your plant, know if it's frost sensitive or not. If when in doubt, like I said, leave it until spring and then do more cleanup then. I would not prune fruit trees now. I like to prune them later in the season, closer to spring. Yes, you're going to have your leaves dropping, and around Thanksgiving is the first time, if you have peaches and nectarines, to spray your liquid copper. Liquid copper is for peach leaf curl. And remember, nectarine's just a hairless peach. That is the fungus that causes that red puckering on your leaves in spring. And by the time you see it, it's too late in spring. So just assume your plant may get it. If your plant's already had it, the spores are there. So you do need to spray it. And around Thanksgiving is usually the first time the leaves are off of the tree. And sometimes even that's not the case. But you also want to wait for a few days of dry. So when you spray, the copper doesn't just get wiped away. So liquid copper, I like to mix it with a horticultural oil. Helps it stick better. And also that horticultural oil is going to help kill off any overwintering insects that were a problem and possibly there. So you could start also spraying your horticultural oil on plants that have had pest problems. Like if roses, you had leaf spot or rust, you could spray the copper as well. If you don't have foliage on your roses, but most people still in November do. So start thinking about that. Start preparing for that. Don't worry if it's raining, you don't get to it. As long as you get one heavy spray in, you're ahead of the game. Ideally, 2 or 3 is better. But I would not prune fruit trees now. I always wait until spring to do that. So really, that is the November to-do list. There's surprisingly more than you would think because it's a big change in seasons, and there's a lot to do to surprisingly already prep for spring. That's really, we're already prepping for spring besides planting your winter and fall veggies. If I'm forgetting anything, please let me know. But remember, it's very zone dependent. I know people who are back east might be prepping for snow, and they might be, laying down a whole bunch of layers of straw or hay to insulate their plants. That's very foreign to me. But it gardening, like Farmer Fred says, gardening is very local. But let me know if I'm missing anything. And remember to follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And if you like this podcast, make sure to rate and review and tell a friend. And remember to subscribe to it so you don't have to search for it. It'll just download for you. And until next time, everyone, happy gardening.